And finally, we talk a lot about these different demographics and these assumptions of where they're going to go. Latinos in Texas, a district that's 97% Latino, went 75 percentage points for Donald Trump. Why?
Misogyny.
It's on the border.
It's
the border
misogyny.
crisis is on their doorstep.
And
they were begging people to care about it for years. We need to take some lessons.
That's what that was.
The lessons are not
Knock, knock.
Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today we're going to talk about Republican gains among Hispanic voters, because despite what the mainstream media is telling you, despite what the online left is telling you, Latino voters did not suddenly become ultra evil, white, and racist, and hating women, and all these other ridiculous things that they use as excuses for ignoring the trends that have been upon us for a long time. And in fact, I, on this channel, got a lot of flack for talking about the movement among Latino voters years ago, because people within my own audience bought into the propaganda that these people are auto Democrats, put them in the bank, even though the trend has been obvious for a very long time. Now, we're going to get into this, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
So it's important for everybody to understand that immigration is not the number one issue for Latino voters. Let me say that again for those of you in the back. Illegal immigration, open borders, is not a winning issue among this population. What we see time and time again is that the issues change from election to election among this demographic group. In 2012, it was actually healthcare that won Barack Obama Latinos, and the economy has been the issue the last couple of cycles, yet the Democrats continuously give them open borders. In fact, they nominated Kamala Harris via a coup, who was the open borders czar. But that being said, the issue of immigration not being a high priority among Latino voters, despite the stereotypes that you get from the left-wing media, does not explain the whole of the shift. In fact, it doesn't even explain a majority of the shift, because what actually has been going down in the Republican Party between them and Latino voters is this old racist trope, you guys might have heard of it, which is talking to Latino voters and trying to convince them to vote for you by appealing to those voters. That's the racist trick that Republicans have been using, that tired old stereotype of actually going to get voters that they want to vote for them, while by contrast, the Democrats have just been assuming that they're entitled to their votes. And a perfect example of this is the state of Florida. Now, you guys will remember, Florida was a swing state for a very long time. But in 2020, all of a sudden, Trump overwhelmingly won Florida, and this was due in large part to gains in the Latino population. And then, to double up on that, to show that that was not an outlier, in 2022, Ron DeSantis not only overwhelmingly won his gubernatorial race, but he won Latino counties like Miami-Dade County and West Palm Beach in an absolutely dominating performance. But the facts are what they are, and while we can give credit at the end and point to this, the groundwork was laid for this long ago by a man called Rick Scott. Yes, this white guy, the whitest guy in the history of white, actually set up the blueprint not just for the state of Florida, but for the entire Republican Party to court these voters. And what's funny about this is that the left has gone out of their way to mock Rick Scott for the work that he's put in, and of course, they do this at their own peril. This is a clip from the Majority Report where they make fun of him for speaking Spanish at a Miami protest, which was a Cuban protest.
Our media, to the exclusion of what's happening in Haiti, for example, has focused on these Cuban protests, which are quite small compared to what we're seeing in protests to right-wing governments internationally. And a lot of this is, it seems a bit coordinated. I'll just say that. And there was no real coverage of the counter-protests.
So first of all, I just want you guys to take note of the fact that the setup for this is pro-communist Cuba. Emma Vigeland, privileged white girl from New Jersey, has decided that she's going to go out of her way to stand up for the Castro regime, while again mocking Rick Scott for attending this protest against said Castro regime and trying to speak Spanish during his attendance of this protest. So already you're seeing a little bit of a disconnect between your liberal elites and the Latino votes put on display for you right here. But again, just get a look to how they react to Rick Scott speaking Spanish.
Al pueblo de Cuba no están solos. nosotros estamos con ustedes en esta lucha. Los Estados Unidos están con ustedes en esta lucha.
So I don't speak Spanish. I also don't pretend to.
I don't think he does either.
I don't think
No,
he does
that sounded
either.
like he was reading those words off of a card or memorized them. He sounds like Peggy Hill.
Now, to be clear, I don't speak Spanish myself, and I do regret the fact that I don't, and I can tell by the way that Rick Scott speaks Spanish that he is a novice in terms of the language. However, look at the smug reaction from the majority report. Look at that smile from ear to ear and how embarrassing they think it is that Rick Scott is attempting to speak Spanish, attempting to connect with the Cuban voters. And the thing is, this is exactly why the left is losing those voters. You start off praising Castro, talking about how, oh, the opposition to the Castro regime, that's not real. Cubans in Miami don't really hate communism. I mean, right-wing government's much bigger problem in Miami. And then you get this smug smiling and talking about how, oh, he's just pretending to speak Spanish, and it's so embarrassing, such pandering, what a total loser. But the fact of the matter is, nothing could be further from the truth, because Rick Scott won his gubernatorial election by an incredibly narrow margin in 2010. But unlike many a Republican before him, he actually wanted to win other elections, so he decided that he was going to make a concerted effort to speak to Latino voters, and this included learning Spanish. In fact, Rick Scott began taking weekly Spanish lessons from the time that he took office in 2010, and the culmination of his efforts, which by the way included having a Cuban lieutenant governor on his ticket, was the victories that we saw for DeSantis and ultimately for Donald Trump in the state of Florida. Let me get into the details of this because Politico actually has a great article breaking this down from back in 2018. Rick Scott has spent years courting Hispanics as if his political career depended on it. He took Spanish lessons while serving as Florida's Republican governor, reached out to the Democratic-leaning Puerto Ricans by visiting their island after Hurricane Maria, not once but 8 times. He chose a Cuban American lieutenant governor and showed up in Cuban strongholds like Hialeah so often that locals joked that El Gobernador must be one of them. So from the moment that Rick Scott won the gubernatorial election in 2010, he committed himself to continuing the work to build a coalition of Latino voters. And unlike other Republicans who just talked to Cuban voters, who even though they voted at the time majority Democrat, were the most right-leaning of Hispanic voters, he decided that he was going to try to make inroads with the highly left-leaning Puerto Rican demographic in the state of Florida. And by the way, that actually paid dividends, because while Democrats were talking about that roast comedians jokes at MSG, Rick Scott and the groundwork that he laid that was repeated by Ron DeSantis ultimately ended up securing the largely Puerto Rican Osceola County for Donald Trump, which is another county flip among Latinos that is in the pocket of the evil orange man. Scott also displayed solidarity with Venezuelan exiles at El Arepazo, a restaurant in Doral, not once, but 6 separate times. Quote, "The first time that we went to the restaurant, I had never met the owner," says Scott's Hispanic communications director, Jamie Flores. "We went back so many times, I swear to God, he's now one of my best friends." It turned out that Scott's political career did depend on his diligent courtship of Latino voters, because on election day, they extended it. Despite the national Democratic wave, Scott unseated Senator Bill Nelson by 10,033 votes, and a key factor was his pursuit of Hispanic voters, neglected by his Democratic opponent. The Hispanic vote was also critical for his successor governor, Ron DeSantis, who also chose a Cuban American running mate, Jeanette Nunez, and also squeaked out a narrow victory in his case over Democrat Andrew Gillum. Democrats have a clear Hispanic problem in America's largest swing state, and that could help President Donald Trump win a second term in 2020. Now look, we know what the result was in 2020 for Trump nationally, but we also know how Florida was no longer a swing state at that point in time, and how Ron DeSantis continued the efforts among Latinos. And by the way, he was aided by the Democrats in their crazy restrictive lockdown policies. Now, in 2022, Ron DeSantis, who picked up the baton from his predecessor, Rick Scott, ended up winning Latino votes by a margin of 57%. And there's a number of reasons for that I'd like to get into. And by the way, among that was major gains, not just among Cubans, but among Puerto Ricans. Again, while the Democrats are offering them open borders, despite the fact that they're natural-born citizens of the United States of America, Ron DeSantis did the work. He spoke to these people much in the same way that Governor, now Senator, Rick Scott did while he was in office. And by the way, this was something that was surprising to the mainstream media, but it wasn't a surprise to the on-the-ground Latino voter mobilization group, Mi Vecino, who said that they predicted Ron DeSantis would win Miami-Dade County. Quote, "We've been on the ground in Miami every single day for 11 months, and all the signs were there. This is the GOP's 10-year strategy coming to fruition." Again, this is a reference to guess who? Rick Scott. Devin Murphy Anderson, the co-founder of Mi Vecino, said in a statement before Tuesday's results. Now, to be 100% clear, it's not Courtship alone that got these voters to come on board. I mean, the Republicans have been attempting to court black voters for a very long time and time again, black voters, specifically black women, end up rejecting them. It's actually delivering for these voters in terms of policy. And one of the biggest swings for Hispanic voters in favor of Ron DeSantis was related to COVID policy. Latinos in the state of Florida make up a disproportionate amount of the hospitality industry, and Ron DeSantis fighting to keep Florida free, fighting to keep the state open, despite criticism from the national media, who is holding up Andrew Cuomo, who locked down everything as the example that everybody should follow, ended up saving these people's jobs, ended up keeping more money in their pocket. In addition to that, he kept fighting and kept schools open in comparison to what we saw across the country. When he did that, guess what? Those kids did not fall behind in the ways that they did in New York and California and everywhere else, where they ignored the science, followed what was politically expedient and what would get them good national media coverage, and kept the schools closed. So Latino parents that relied on the schools in order to get their kids to learn English, guess what? They benefited overwhelmingly from Ron DeSantis. In addition to that, Ron DeSantis and Rick Scott made it absolutely clear where they stood on socialism, while the Democrats would play footsie with the far left of their own party. And that is a big turnoff for the Venezuelans and the Cuban population. And by the way, they were warned of this over and over and over again. The Republicans have been actively registering Hispanic voters for the past couple of years, and the numbers of registered Latino voters have gone up from 640,000 in 2020 to 697,000 in 2022. That's an increase of about 58,000. Meanwhile, the number of Democratic registered Latino voters has actually dropped by 40,000. So there's a significant number of Latinos that are switching from Democrats to Republicans. And when you ask people why they're changing their registration, they say over and over again that the Democrats are veering too far to the left, according to Evelyn Perez, who is a Democratic strategist. She said that in a state where Hispanic voters are more moderate, Democrats need to be careful using the word progressive, which equates to socialist to some Latinos born in Latin America. Images of raised fists are emblematic of left-wing politicians and movements throughout the history of their countries of Latin America. So what we're seeing in terms of left-wing voters is not them becoming suddenly white supremacist misogynists. We're seeing a party, the Republican Party, going out of their way to reach out to them, going out of their way to recruit them, learning their language, visiting their places, advocating for them, and by the way, being unambiguous on where they stand on certain issues. By contrast, the Democrats are leaning further left. They're using the imagery that a lot of these Latinos fled in their own countries, and that's pushing them in the camp of the Republicans. You also have efforts to learn Spanish, advertise in Spanish, go on Univision, do everything and anything in order to speak to these people, and what you see from the Democrats is a sense of entitlement to these voters, while again, they run the symbols of the authoritarian governments that they left. So think about what Emma Vigeland says as she's chuckling and laughing at Rick Scott attempting to speak Spanish about how, oh, these movements against the left wing in Latin America, they're not real, they're not legitimate. Well, the proof in the pudding is in the taste, and guess what? The taste is victory for the Republican Party among this demographic. Now look, I talked a lot about Florida in this particular video because Rick Scott is really the architect of this strategy and other Republicans are following suit, but the fact of the matter is this has been replicated across the country, and this is why you get exit polls out of the state of Michigan that show that 60% of Latino voters are actually backing Donald Trump in that particular state. But another great example of this is the state of Texas. Now already, Texas Latinos have voted vastly differently than California Latinos. I believe if they voted the same as California Latinos, then I think Texas would have been a blue state back in 2008 or 2004, basically a really long time ago. But Ted Cruz, for the first time as the senator from Texas, who is Latino himself, actually won the Latino demographic and saved his senatorial seat due in large part to the fact that he has put in similar work to Rick Scott. And again, I will point out some of the biggest flips and the biggest gains for Trump among Latinos have been Latinos on the border counties in the state of Texas. And very notably, there is the county that is known as Starr County that went overwhelmingly for Hillary Clinton. I believe it went 60 points for Hillary Clinton, and then it went about 20 points for Joe Biden. Well, Donald Trump just won it 60-40 or 58-32, which is a 16-point victory. So that represents a nearly 80-point shift in Starr County. And the reason we're talking about Starr County is because that is the most Latino county in the entire country. 97.6% of the demographics of this county are Hispanic, are Latino, largely descended from Mexico, right on the border of Mexico. And guess what? They're sick of illegal immigration. They're sick of Kamala Harris being the border czar and allowing these people to flood to the nation. Now, obviously, this is a small county, but the fact is, they're also one of those small counties that are being overrun by illegal migrants. And we've seen gains across these Latin or majority Latin or significant population Latin counties across the country that are close to the border, because despite what the Democrats have said over and over and over again, Latinos' number one issue is not illegal immigration. Like, I know this may be shocking to members of the Democratic Party, but if you're voting in the United States of America in our elections, you are a citizen, so you do not personally have immigration issues. It might be something that is connected to your family, but the fact of the matter is, when you're already here, when you're already in America, you don't want all these other people taking advantage and gaming the system because you see America as your country.
And finally, we talk a lot about these different demographics and these assumptions of where they're going to go. Latinos in Texas, a district that's 97% Latino, went 75 percentage points for Donald Trump. Why?
Misogyny.
It's on the border.
It's
the border
misogyny.
crisis is on their doorstep.
And
they were begging people to care about it for years. We need to take some lessons.
That's what that
The
was.
lessons are not misogyny.
Now, these are the cold, hard facts, what the Democrats should be confronting, rather than labeling Latinos racist, bigot, homophobes like they do to every other demographic that doesn't comply with their whims. But guess what? The Republican Party is going to stay the course. They're going to continue pushing this agenda. They're going to continue recruiting Latino voters, and maybe in 2028, but probably in 2032, we will talk about the Republican Party not just gaining among Latino voters, but potentially winning them nationwide, which will have reverberations across this country that are going to be devastating for the left wing. Now, look, I'd like to close with an anecdote so maybe you can understand how significant this is. I actually have done many live events where I've met people in my own audience, and I've been run into or bumped into on the street by people who watch my content, and for whatever reason, disproportionately, Latinos are the consumers of the videos that I watch. In fact, in my recent live event where I debated Joshua Eagle on whether or not libertarians should vote for Kamala Harris, I remember two brothers among other Latinos that were there that looked 10 years younger than me, but they were actually older than me. And they were great to me. I have a picture with them that they took that they should have tagged me on Instagram at Actual Justice so I could repost it. And they never brought up immigration. And almost none of the Latinos that I've ever met, that I've ever discussed, bring up this issue. In fact, we don't even talk about that issue all that much on this channel. They very often talk about issues of crime, places that they notice that have been popping off, and sometimes they'll ask me to highlight certain areas and what they're seeing because something in my videos is exactly what's going on in their community. And this shouldn't be surprising to you, and it's not surprising to me. I'm half Puerto Rican myself. I know what the people in my Puerto Rican side of the family are concerned with. I know what my friends who are Latino are concerned with. And guess what? It's issues like that. Crime in terms of the local level, again, economy in terms of the national level, just like most people in the United States of America, but very few times do these people actually bring up issues related to immigration. And when that issue does come up, more often than not, they want stricter enforcement. So yeah, this is what we're seeing repeatedly within the community, within the data, what works in terms of politicians when they go out to recruit them. But the Democrats are choosing to ignore it. They're choosing to label these people evil white racists, try and guilt them. And honestly, they're just not having it. So yeah, continue to lose this demographic while pretending you're entitled to it. I thank you for that. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about how Latino voters have flipped Republican. Till next time.